"You are not my daughter. You are my disgrace. Take that bastard pregnancy and get out of my sight." That wasn't a threat. That was a death sentence for my old life. My mother, Brenda Miller, had just thrown my suitcase out the front door. She threw it with such force that the zipper burst open, scattering all my clothes across the freezing snow of Connecticut. She stood blocking the threshold, still wearing the expensive silk dress she had put on for afternoon tea, but her carefully made-up face was twisted in disgust. "Please, there's a blizzard out here." I trembled, trying to step closer, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Don't you step 1 foot closer." She screamed, her eyes darting to the neighbor's window to see if anyone was watching. I would rather tell people my daughter died than let them see a 17-year-old brat with a bastard child staining this family's reputation. "You are a mistake, Cassidy, and I am correcting it." The heavy oak door slammed shut right in my face. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was as dry and final as a gunshot ending my life. I stood alone in the dead of winter with no thick coat, no cash, painfully realizing I had just been thrown away like a bag of trash by my own mother simply because her vanity mattered more than my life. 10 years later, I was sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline when the security intercom buzzed. "Miller, there are 2 ragged-looking elderly people at the mansion gate. They are crying and claiming to be your biological parents." I spun my chair around, looked down at the glass of wine on my desk and smiled. Tonight, I was going to show them what that mistake from years ago had become. But before I show you the sweetest revenge in history, please help me out and hit that subscribe button right below. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are and what city are you watching from? Comment below and I'll heart every single one. Now let's go back to that fateful night. The night I lost everything. The walk from my mother's driveway to the main road felt like a funeral march for my former self. The snow was coming down harder now, the sharp flakes biting into my exposed skin like thousands of needles. I dragged my broken suitcase through the slush, my hands numb and my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had no car, no cash, and nowhere to go. But in my desperation, instinct gave me a singular destination: Justin's house. Justin was the captain of the football team, the shining star of our high school, and the father of the baby growing inside me. He was the only person I believed would reach out and save me. It took me 40 minutes to walk the 2 miles to his family's estate, a sprawling colonial house glowing with warm yellow light against the pitch-black night. I could hear the thumping bass of music from inside before I even stepped onto the porch. He was throwing a celebration party. I rang the doorbell, shivering so hard I could barely stand, silently praying he would open the door and pull me into the safety of the warmth. When the door finally opened, the heat rushed out, carrying the smell of expensive cologne and pizza, a cruel reminder of the comfort I had just been stripped of. But it wasn't Justin who opened the door. It was a girl I knew from school, Megan, a rich girl from a wealthy family. She was wearing Justin's oversized hoodie, holding a red Solo cup, looking at me with a sneer as if I were a stray dog wandering onto her porch. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Before I could answer, Justin appeared right behind her. He looked at me, soaked, crying and desperate, but the expression on his handsome face wasn't concern. It was annoyance. "Cassidy, what the hell are you doing here?" he asked, stepping outside and pulling the door partially shut to block the noise of the party, as if afraid my presence would pollute the fun atmosphere inside. I told him everything through my sobs. I told him Brenda had kicked me out, that I had nowhere to turn, that I was terrified for our baby's future. I watched every twitch on his face, desperately searching for a flicker of the love he had sworn to me just weeks ago. But instead, his eyes darted around the yard, as if checking to see if anyone was witnessing this shameful scene. "Look, Cass," he said, his voice dropping low, cold, and emotionless. "I can't deal with this mess right now. Next week, the college scouts are coming to watch the game. I have a full-ride scholarship to worry about." I stared at him, unable to believe my ears. "But I have nowhere else to go," I begged, trying to reach for his hand. He pulled back as if I carried a contagious disease. "That's not my problem," he said flatly, glancing at Megan, who was watching with amusement. "You need to leave right now. My parents will call the cops if you keep loitering on their private property." He didn't wait for my answer. He turned his back, walked back into that warm world, and slammed the door right in my face. The click of the lock was softer than my mother's door, but it was sharper, severing the last shred of hope I had in humanity. I walked for another hour into the void until I found a bus stop with a plastic shelter. It offered almost no protection from the wind, but it was the only dry place I could find. I curled up on the freezing metal bench, wrapping my arms tight around my stomach, whispering apologies to the tiny life inside me. I was exhausted, my body shutting down from the stress and the bone-chilling cold. I must have drifted off into a fitful, nightmare-filled sleep because I jerked awake when a car backfired nearby. It was pitch black. My body was stiff and aching, but the real horror hit when I reached for my suitcase. It was gone. My clothes, a few keepsakes, the only assets I had left in the world. Someone had stolen everything while I slept. I shot up, panic rising in my throat, looking around the empty, snow-covered street. I patted down my pockets. My wallet was gone too. I was empty-handed. No warm coat, not a penny to my name, no ID, no family, and the baby in my belly had no father. I collapsed onto that freezing bench and screamed a heart-wrenching scream, but the sound was instantly swallowed by the uncaring night. I don't remember exactly how I survived the next 48 hours of hell. Survival instinct has a strange way of erasing memories that your mind isn't strong enough to carry. Eventually, I managed to hitchhike a ride on a long-haul truck to Chicago, a city big enough and cruel enough for a nameless girl to disappear without a trace. With nothing but the dirty clothes on my back and a grim determination that scared even me, I started from -0. I found a job washing dishes in the back of a greasy spoon diner in a rundown neighborhood where police sirens were the nightly lullaby. The owner, a man with grease stains permanently etched into his skin, paid me cash under the table. He knew I was underage and clearly running from something, so he lowballed me. $4 an hour. It wasn't enough for a human life, but it was enough for a room in a boarding house that reeked of mildew and boiled cabbage. I worked 12-hour shifts, my hands constantly red and raw from scalding water and harsh chemicals. My back screamed in protest every time I bent over to scrub, especially as my pregnancy grew. I learned to swallow my pride and eat the scraps left on customers' plates before scraping them into the trash, half-eaten toast cold, scrambled eggs, or untouched slices of bacon. Dignity is a luxury for the rich. When you are starving and carrying a life inside you, shame is the first thing you have to throw away. 6 months later, I went into labor right on the floor of that bug-infested room. No insurance, no phone to call 911. I had to grit my teeth and walk 3 blocks to the nearest county hospital. Every few minutes, I had to stop clinging to a street lamp to breathe through contractions that felt like my body was being torn in half. The triage nurse looked at me with pity, a look that was worse than the physical pain. "Name," she asked abruptly, her pen hovering over the clipboard. "Cassidy," I gasped, gripping the counter until my knuckles turned white. "Emergency contact," she asked next, her eyes scanning the empty waiting room behind me. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating like a boulder on my chest. "I don't have anyone," I whispered, my voice cracking. I was put in a shared labor room with 3 other women. All of them had husbands or mothers holding their hands, wiping sweat from their foreheads, whispering sweet words of encouragement. As for me, I only had the cold fluorescent lights on the ceiling and the rhythmic, emotionless beeping of the heart monitor. When the pain reached a crescendo that blurred my vision in a panic, I asked the nurse for a landline phone. I needed to try one last time. My hands shook so violently I could barely press the number I had memorized since I was 5. It rang once, twice. Then a click. "Hello," Brenda's voice rang out. It sounded annoyed, distracted, as if I were interrupting her reality TV show. "It's me," I sobbed, the pain tearing through my voice. "I'm in the hospital. The baby is coming. Please, I'm scared." There was a pause on the other end, a silence colder and more cruel than that snowy night. Then, without a single word of response, the line went dead. I stared at the receiver, listening to the endless dial tone, and painfully realized that the umbilical cord connecting me to my mother had been severed by her own hand long before this moment. I didn't call back. I pushed for 3 hours, fighting death alone, with only a kind nurse named Sarah occasionally holding my hand when she was free. When my daughter finally entered the world, crying with a lung capacity that surprised the doctor, I didn't feel relief. I felt a fierce protectiveness rise up, a fear mixed with power. I named her Hope because she was the only thing I had left in the world to believe in. I looked at her tiny, crumpled face, held her close, and made an ironclad vow. "You will never have to know this loneliness. You will never have to wonder if you are wanted." 2 years passed. The smell of rancid dishwater had been replaced by the scent of expensive wine and truffle oil, but my feet still ached the same way at the end of every shift. I had graduated from dishwasher to waitress at the Gilded Fork, an upscale bistro in downtown Chicago that catered to the kind of snobbish elites my mother used to associate with. I was 19 now, juggling single motherhood and 2 jobs, sleeping an average of 4 hours a night. Hope was in a private daycare that cost 60% of my income, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. I had learned to make myself invisible, smiling patiently when customers were rude, becoming a silent ghost in a black apron. But everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon when Mrs. Sullivan walked in. Eleanor Sullivan was a living legend in the Chicago food industry, an iron lady who had built a supply chain empire from scratch. She was sitting at table 4, the frown on her forehead deepening as she inspected her Niçoise salad. She signaled for me, her finger tapping impatiently on the white linen tablecloth. "This basil," she said, not bothering to look up at me, "is wilted. And the tuna is canned, not seared fresh as the menu claims. Take it back." Most servers would have apologized profusely and retreated immediately, afraid of losing their tip. But that day I was just too tired. I was tired of bowing my head, tired of the shiny lies rich people told each other. "You're right about the basil," I replied, my voice strangely calm. "The supplier delivered it late yesterday, and the chef tried to save it with ice water, but the cell walls had already collapsed, so it couldn't crisp up again. As for the tuna, it is fresh, ma'am, but the chef overcooked it by about 30 seconds because the lunch rush slammed the grill station. I can have him remake it, but with the current pressure, he's likely to make the same mistake again." Sullivan finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp as razors, evaluating me like I was an unbalanced spreadsheet. "You know quite a bit about kitchen operations for someone who just carries a tray," she remarked with hidden meaning. "I read," I said simply. "And I observe." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes piercing through me, then closed the menu. "I don't want the salad anymore. I want you to come to my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late." That brief conversation completely changed the trajectory of my life. Sullivan didn't hire me to wait tables. She hired me as a junior procurement assistant. She saw something in me, a fierce hunger for success that no school could teach. For the next 5 years, she became the mother Brenda never could be, though she was never soft or coddling. She was a drill sergeant with steel discipline. She taught me how to negotiate for my life with farmers, how to spot a fraudulent contract from a single paragraph, and how to command a boardroom full of men who always thought a young woman had no place at the table. I worked like a maniac, harder than I ever had in my life. I absorbed her knowledge like a dry sponge meeting water, staying late to analyze market trends, driving to remote farms at 4 a.m. to test soil pH levels. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was silently building an arsenal for myself. Pair Sync, The Rise and True Love. By the time I was 24, the title of assistant had become too small for my ambition. I saw a massive gap in the market that even the seasoned Mrs. Sullivan had missed. The ultra-wealthy didn't just want good food. They wanted to buy the story of purity they craved, the guarantee of absolute exclusivity. I branched out and launched Green Hope Organics, a boutique supply firm connecting ultra-high net worth households directly with small, regenerative farms. I meticulously curated everything from eggs laid by heritage hens to heirloom tomatoes grown in soil with specific pH levels. My first $1 million contract came after just 6 months of operation, supplying the private kitchens of 3 NBA players and a tech billionaire in Silicon Valley. I remember the moment I sat staring at the check, the long string of zeros making me dizzy. I was no longer that girl sleeping at a bus stop. I had become a force to be reckoned with. However, success is a lonely tower when you've pulled up the drawbridge and built fortress walls to protect your heart. I didn't trust anyone. Men were either like Justin, weak and opportunistic, or like my stepfather Gary, enablers of cruelty. Then I met Eric. He wasn't in the cutthroat food industry. He was a landscape architect I hired to design edible gardens for one of my clients. Eric was completely different. He was quiet, steady as a rock with hands rough from working with stone and soil. He didn't try to impress me with money or fake status. He impressed me with the little things, like remembering that Hope loved butterflies and secretly planting milkweed in the garden design just to attract them for her. His patience felt foreign and suspicious to me. For months, I kept him at arm's length, waiting for his mask to slip, waiting for him to ask for a loan or a favor. But he never did. One evening, after a site visit, we sat on a stone wall watching a red sunset. "Why do you work yourself to the bone like that, Cassidy?" he asked gently, his eyes full of genuine concern. "You already have more than enough." I looked at him, my defensive instincts kicking into high gear. "I work so I never have to ask anyone for permission to exist again," I replied, my voice hard and cold. Eric didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly and said, "That makes sense. But be careful, don't build a fortress so thick that you lock yourself inside all alone." That sentence touched me. Slowly, he chipped away at the defensive walls I had built around myself. He loved Hope like his own, teaching her to ride a bike, how to plant seeds, and patiently answering her thousands of questions. He earned my trust, not with grand romantic gestures, but with consistent, boring reliability, something I had never tasted before. When we finally moved in together into a penthouse overlooking the lake, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was safe. But ironically, the past always has a way of knocking on the door just when you think you've double-locked every entrance. Peace is often just a fake silence before the past decides to scream its way back in. By the time I turned 27, Green Hope had expanded to 3 states, and my net worth had crossed a threshold where I could buy anything without looking at the price tag. I had purchased a sprawling estate in Lake Forest, a quiet, affluent suburb north of Chicago, where dark secrets were hidden behind perfectly manicured hedges. I thought I had buried the painful memories of Connecticut under mountains of paperwork and success, but the grapevine of the ultra-rich is a small, toxic loop. The news reached me through a commercial real estate lawyer. While discussing business, he casually mentioned a foreclosure auction happening back east, a distressed asset in Connecticut going for pennies on the dollar because the owners were buried in lawsuits and debt. When he slid the property dossier across the mahogany table, my heart stopped. I knew that house. I knew every brick, every window frame, and I remembered exactly how bone-chilling the driveway felt in the middle of that winter night. It was my childhood home. Brenda and Gary Miller had fallen, and they had fallen hard. The dossier painted a pathetic picture of their decline. Brenda's sick obsession with holding on to her youth had turned into a plastic surgery addiction, draining their liquid assets. Meanwhile, Gary, desperate to maintain the facade of high society, had mortgaged the house to fund risky investments and then defaulted completely. They hadn't just lost money, they lost their honor and their face, the things they valued more than life itself. The bank had seized the mansion, and they were currently hiding out in a rented condo in a bad part of town, dodging creditors. I stared at the photo of the house, the once proud pillars now looking gray, the lawn overgrown with weeds. A normal person would look away satisfied that karma had served justice. But I wasn't looking for temporary satisfaction. I was looking for a permanent ending. I ordered the lawyer to buy it immediately. "Use an anonymous LLC," I said, my voice flat. "Do not let the name Cassidy Miller appear anywhere on the paperwork. Buy it, gut the interior, and hold the keys for me." 2 months later, I flew back to Connecticut for the first time in a decade. I drove a rental car to the property, parking in the exact spot where Brenda had thrown my suitcase 10 years ago. I walked through the empty rooms, the sound of my heels echoing dryly on the hardwood floors. The house reeked of stale air and broken dreams. I walked into the dining room where I was forced to be absolutely silent during meals, the living room where I wasn't allowed to touch the expensive ornaments, and finally the kitchen, where I was refused food because I was called too fat as a teenager. I stood there expecting the pain to rush back, but strangely I felt nothing. The house was now just inanimate wood and stone. The terrifying power they once held over me had evaporated completely. I wasn't a victim returning to the scene of the crime. I was its new owner. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and called the contractor on standby. "It's a go," I said decisively. "Gut the entire interior. We are completely changing the purpose of this building." I want it operational in 6 months. I had a plan for the Miller estate, a plan that would become the final tombstone, burying their vanity and cruelty. 3 years passed. The Miller project was complete and running smoothly without my daily interference. I was back living a peaceful life in Chicago with Eric and Hope, who was now a smart, kind-hearted 10-year-old. It was a Tuesday morning, the air crisp and clear, the kind of autumn weather that makes you glad to be alive. But then that fateful call came. My head of security, David, a former Marine, stern and serious, buzzed the intercom. "Ma'am," his voice was unusually tense. "There is a strange vehicle at the main gate. An elderly couple. They are insisting they are your parents. I froze my pen, hovering over an unsigned contract. They had found me. Despite the name change, despite the layers of anonymous LLCs, despite the geographic distance, sheer desperation had turned them into excellent detectives. "Let them in," I said, after a long, calculated pause. "But David, stay close." I walked out to the front porch, wrapping my cashmere cardigan tight around me like armor. The car pulling up to the driveway was a rusted sedan, the engine whining like it was dying. When the doors opened, I almost didn't recognize them. Gary looked pathetically shrunken, his once arrogant posture replaced by a permanent stoop from the weight of failure. But Brenda was the true horror show. Her face looked like a glitchy mask. Skin pulled too tight from surgery, fillers shifted out of place, creating a permanently frozen look of surprise. Her clothes were designer labels from 10 years ago, now frayed and ill-fitting, the pathetic costume of a royal life she could no longer reach. They walked up the stone steps, their eyes scanning the grandeur of my estate with a disgusting mix of hunger and envy. Brenda spoke first. She didn't say hello. She didn't say I missed you. She looked me up and down with that familiar judgmental gaze and said, "I knew you'd make it. I told Gary Cassidy has my drive. She will land on her feet." Her audacity took my breath away. She was blatantly rewriting history right in front of my face, gaslighting. "Is that what you call it?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Drive. You called me a mistake. You threw me into a blizzard to die." Brenda waved her hand dismissively as if it were a trivial detail, the loose skin on her arm shaking. "Oh, Cassidy, don't be so dramatic. That was tough love. If I hadn't pushed you out, you would have stayed stuck in that town and become a nobody. I did what was necessary to forge you into someone strong. And look at all this." She gestured at my house brazenly, taking credit for the bricks she didn't pay a dime for. "We are family," Gary chimed in, his voice raspy and weak. "We've fallen on hard times, Cass. We are your parents, after all. You can't let us live like animals while you live like a queen here. It's against the natural order." They weren't here to apologize. They were here to collect. They truly believed that sharing DNA gave them a perpetual mortgage on my success. I looked at Brenda, seeing the delusional madness swimming in her eyes, and I realized she truly believed she was the unsung hero behind my success. She thought her cruelty back then was an educational strategy. "You want help," I stated coldly, not asking. "We need a place to stay," Brenda demanded, bluntly stepping closer, invading my personal space. "And a monthly stipend. We are willing to move in here, help out. Manage the staff. I can manage the help for you. God knows you probably need guidance from someone with class to run a proper estate." The manipulation was clumsy and crude, like a dull knife from a woman who used to be as sharp as a surgeon. She was trying to use family duty to force me into gratitude. I smiled then, but the smile never touched my eyes. "I think there is a major misunderstanding here," I said softly but with steel in my voice. "You think I'm the daughter who walked away 10 years ago. But that daughter died the night you locked the door. I am just a stranger who owns the house you are standing on." I signaled to David. He stepped out of the shadows, his looming presence making the Millers shrink back. However, I did actually buy a house for the family. I continued, watching a greedy spark of hope light up in Brenda's eyes. "I bought your old house. The mansion in Connecticut." Brenda gasped, covering her mouth emotionally. "You bought it back. Oh my God, Cassidy. I knew you still cared. When can we move back in?" "You can't," I said, my voice cutting through the air like shattering glass. "I didn't buy it for you. I donated it." I took a step forward, forcing them to look me in the eye. "It is now called The Haven. It is a free shelter for pregnant teenagers kicked out by their families, just like I was. Your master bedroom. It now sleeps 4 girls who have nowhere else to go. Your fancy dining room. It serves 3 hot meals a day to women you once despised as mistakes. Every day that house is saving girls from becoming the cruel person you wanted me to be." The blood drained from Brenda's face, leaving her looking like a wax figure left too close to a fire. The brutal truth hit her. Her legacy, her lifelong symbol of status, was now a monument to the very people she looked down on, funded by the daughter she threw away. It wasn't just revenge, it was the total erasure of her belief system. "You ungrateful witch," she whispered, the mask of fake morality finally shattering. "I gave you life. And immediately after you tried to kill it, I countered sharply. Now get off my property. David will escort you to the gate. If you ever return, I will have you arrested for trespassing." I didn't wait for their reaction. I turned my back and walked straight into the house. As the heavy oak door began to close, the phone in my pocket rang. I pulled it out. It was Brenda calling, probably to scream, to beg, or to curse her final words. I walked to the foyer table where a crystal vase filled with fresh hydrangeas stood full of water. I looked at the ringing phone one last time, seeing the name Mom flashing on the screen. Without a second of hesitation, I dropped the phone into the vase. It sank to the bottom, the final air bubbles rising to the surface, the screen flickering for a second before going black in the darkness of the water. Absolute silence returned to my home. I walked into the kitchen where Eric was making pancakes and Hope was engrossed in drawing a butterfly. I sat down, took my daughter's small hand, and finally, truly, I let the past go forever. Watching that phone screen go black at the bottom of the water was the moment I finally understood the truth about the word forgiveness. People always tell you that you have to forgive family to find peace, but they are wrong. Sometimes true peace is only found when you have the courage to cut the rope that is dragging you down. Looking back at the image of that 17-year-old girl shivering in the blizzard, I realized Brenda was right about one thing. I was a mistake in her superficial world. I was a mistake because I was real. I wasn't perfect, and I was incapable of living a lie like her. But in my world, I was the architect of my own survival. My story isn't just about going from rags to riches or a sweet revenge. Money is just a tool. It can buy a mansion, but it can't buy the laughter I hear in my kitchen every morning. The real victory wasn't seeing the pathetic look on my mother's face when I turned her away. The real victory is that I built a table where everyone is welcome, where love is served unconditionally, and where no one is ever made to feel like a burden. To anyone reading or listening to this story, those who have been called a mistake, worthless, or a disappointment by the people who were supposed to protect them, listen to me. Biology is not destiny. Blood only makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and love make you family. You have every right to fire toxic relatives from your life and hire people who actually value you. Don't let the trauma of the past become your identity. Let it become the fuel to burn your fire. Turn your pain into a shelter for others, just like I did with that old house. I rose from the ashes not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I owed it to myself to prove that I was right. My name is Cassidy Miller, and I am not a mistake. I am a survivor, a mother, and the builder of my own destiny. And if I could survive that storm, so can you. Thank you for listening to my story. If this touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life you might change with just a share. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Stay strong and remember, your dark past does not define your bright future.